Today's world, there's no shortage of information. Knowledge is abundant, perspectives are everywhere. But true insight doesn't come from access alone. It comes from differentiated understanding. It's the ability to piece together scattered signals, cut through the noise and clutter, and form a clear original perspective on a situation, a trend, a business, or a person. That's what makes understanding powerful. Every episode, I bring in a guest with a unique point of view on a critical matter, phenomenon, or business trend, someone who can help us see things differently. This is your host, Shao, and welcome to Differentiated Understanding. Joining me today is Diana Wu David, Director of Futures at ServiceNow. Diana is ranked number 2 futurist in the world by Global Gurus. She ran her own business for nearly a decade called Future Proof Lab, where she worked with C-suite executives and boards to help them create future-focused, resilient organizations. She is an expert in guiding professionals and leaders in this ever-evolving business landscape, leveraging strategic foresight to turn uncertainty into a competitive advantage. Diana, it's so great to have you on the show, and it was lovely catching up with you before you moved away from Hong Kong back to the US after, what is it, almost 2 decades in Asia. It's about your journey from the States to Hong Kong, and just what made you kind of build a career around working with executives and leaders and upskilling them, especially working with the newest and latest technology.
So, yes, I just moved back to New York to take this new position, which was to start a futures organization with ServiceNow. And I guess from the very beginning, I've been somebody who's been interested in what's next, even from when I was in graduate school, in business school in New York, and the internet was just coming on board. And I started coding in Emacs and did my first website. And it was like, before the White House did their first website. So, it was early days. Worked at Time Warner Electronic Publishing, where we had a guy named Carpaccio Man who sat in a dark closet, basically scanning millimeter thick pieces of an actual cadaver so that he could build a model of the human body. So hard to believe, but those things have always fascinated me, not just the technology of it, but what it makes possible. And I feel like living in different countries is a part of that as well. They say the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. And by traveling around, you can kind of see that. Not to say that it's far future in one place and not as much in another, but it manifests in different ways. So that was my opportunity to go to Asia, 20 years ago or so, when the Henry Luce Foundation, actually, he started Time Magazine. He sends young Americans to Asia. So I got to go and work at, funny enough, Internet World, which was a huge event. And I was going to go start a print magazine that was about the internet. So that gives you a timeline in terms of where it was, and everything was booming and it was super fun. And I spent then my career in Asia partly because of that momentum. China was accelerating in terms of its growth. Everything was happening. It felt like anything was possible. And so to move back is in part this amazing opportunity. ServiceNow was my client before, so I knew I liked their values, I liked their ethos, and also I recognized this moment that, like the internet, when it felt like everything was changing, AI is also really disrupting things. And to be able to be in a company that's just all in on AI and wants to really help define the future and help people find their place in the future seemed like a perfect opportunity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's so much happening in the AI space, especially in the US right now. And on that topic, actually, today we really want to zoom in on the future of work. AI has disrupted everything, and it's so essential to know about what the future of an organization might look like, how AI will be integrated into the workspace and workplace. And ServiceNow obviously is a front leader in really adopting AI and helping its clients in this transition. Could you tell us a bit about the kind of biggest trends or challenges you're seeing in this space, and what kind of work are you doing now at ServiceNow?
Well, it's been like a couple of weeks, so it's really new. And I'm sitting in this kind of empty apartment. So all of this is new, which is fun. It's kind of like trying to apply your own, change methodologies to yourself, which always hurts more than applying it to others. It's an interesting and really fascinating moment for me, because I'm sort of coming into this firm and I'm experiencing it as an individual in addition to as a kind of a foresight professional, a practitioner. So today, for instance, they've rolled out something that assesses you on your AI capabilities in the firm at ServiceNow. It was kind of nerve-wracking. I've been speaking about AI from the stage in front of thousands of people. You've seen me do AI workshops, and all of a sudden I had to take a test. And I was thinking, what if I fail? That'll be so embarrassing. But at the same time, it's amazing to think that every single person in this company is going to get a sense of the baseline. And then immediately it's like, great, here's where you did well, here's where you didn't do well, here are some great ways to fill the gap. And so it's kind of on two levels that I speak. One is the fact that I just fundamentally believe that AI is going to disrupt work. I think that we have an opportunity to redesign work in a more outcome oriented way and really across different departments. And I've always been somebody who likes to be that person that connects, the different departments. But now we don't have to have those people because we'll have AI do it. I just think that I recently heard Christopher Schutz, who was the founder of Logic AI, which ServiceNow acquired, and he focuses on sales. And he said, salespeople only sell 10 hours a week because they spend all of their time doing all the other things like qualifying the leads and trying to find the contact information and reaching out to schedule the meeting and then trying to explain the information and then doing it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he was saying, that all that stuff is administrative. So I ran a sales team and I could tell you like nobody wants to do that stuff. So the question is, what if you could sell 30 hours a week? What if you could sell 39 hours a week? So part of it is partnering with AI or agentic AI. But I think it's also just the access to the data and information required to seal the deal. So there's so many issues in, particularly a big enterprise, but in most places where you need to go to legal and find out what, have somebody look at it. You need to figure out how to log it into the sales system. But then, there's sort of HR, then there's finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that being able to have access to all the data in a company and have a sort of agentic AI layer that can go anywhere within that company, within departments to create the outcome you want unlocks extraordinary potential. So that's sort of the thing that I see that's really interesting. At the moment, a lot of companies are just in sort of mode one of just making the things that they already do faster, quicker, better. But ultimately, it's the cross sectionality, I think, that will unlock tremendous value.
I think that's really interesting. And it's something I've actually written about as well, where, AI adoption in the US is a lot more focused on enterprises and, it's a lot about productivity gains. Whereas in China right now, a lot of it is actually very consumer facing. So it's almost more entertainment focused or, enhancing consumer experiences, right? So actually
Yeah.
beyond that, I was wondering, is it really just a tool to really help knowledge workers and white collars, or do you see the kind of future of economy just really evolving, from the blue collar jobs as well as the white collar jobs and just to how the whole economy will be functioning? How do you kind of see that holistically?
I think it'll be amazing for many people. So I was just in the Philippines and did a big keynote on the future of retail. And in preparation, talked to some of our smart ops people in Europe. And they've been working with Schwartz department store. And I talked to one of my colleagues who is in California and she works with like big sports arenas and she's working with FIFA and that kind of thing. And they have been doing amazing visualizations where the people who are the frontline workers who may be, let's say, in a grocery store and in an arena might be idle, or maybe they're, on one side of the arena when all of the traffic flow and the people flow is on the other side, or maybe you have inventory imbalance. Suddenly you have an intelligent command center where you have somebody who can say, oh, okay, well, I can see that, a human could see, or even an AI could see that more people need to be, in a different location or helping out because t-shirt sales are going crazy on the left side. And, being able to start to integrate that into people's working lives really affects the profitability of, a retail client or somebody who has a tremendous amount of frontline workers, but doesn't necessarily know how to manage them all. Because most of the pattern, the review of patterns has been backward looking. But if you can have real time data, then that's amazing. And so the sort of highest performance example of that is working with the F1, which ServiceNow does as well, where, you only have so many people in the pit crew. Like they have to do these tire changes in a second. They have to do everything at every millisecond counts. And they can have the intelligent command center back in Germany or wherever they need to have it. So they can actually see and recalibrate in real time so that the people who are, doing things on the front line that is not knowledge work can do the best job that they can do.
Yeah, I think speaking of data and metrics, what are some metrics companies and management are using to measure the efficiency of AI? Like we can kind of go back to what we were earlier talking about. Is it all on productivity gains or is it like employee per revenue, customer acquisition cost reduction? Like how are people actually tracking whether AI is providing the ROI or it's actually impactful or not?
There's a there's a fascinating way that ServiceNow is tracking that with something called AI Control Tower, where at the end of the day, each of the key leaders within the company develops their own use cases. They estimate what kind of value those use cases will have. And it could be, how many people will be served. It could be cost saved. It could be any of the things that you just mentioned. And then critically, it's tracked for each one of those cases. First of all, it's prioritized across the company. So each of the leaders, be it for instance, the general counsel who's looking at compliance or HR that's rolling out online training for within and without the company. It could be marketing. Any of those things are all tracked across the company. Anybody in the company can see what they are. Anybody can see the adoption. So you can see if it's, we thought we would have 100 people using it and 50 people are using it. What are we going to do then? And it's reviewed regularly. And then what is it in terms of, the amount of value that we thought that we provided? So that I think is an extraordinary way to orchestrate and AI program. And that I think gives you the whole view, because what I've seen a lot in my clients prior to joining is, this difficulty in going from pilot to scale. And this gives you the opportunity to, for instance, see something that's working in one location that might scale to other locations. Just because it's a training that you have in HR doesn't mean that you can't use some kind of similar module in compliance training for your, general counsel, et cetera.
So the use of AI eventually in our workplace will just be omnipresent. You wouldn't even feel it. It's kind of like now being silly. Like, do you use the internet, right? Like that's if someone asked you to use it, would be so silly, right? Yeah, it's such an infancy stage still, I think. And like to your point, the tracking will be really, really helpful. But I think most people still haven't really found a clear ROI metric for AI adoption yet in terms of enterprise integration. Obviously we're trying to see how to integrate AI in different verticals to help people like boost efficiency and productivity. It's definitely kind of where we're seeing most of the AI integration is now, right now with businesses.
One of the most interesting things is that we are shifting on a really fundamental level. So maybe we can measure the things in the way that we always measure them. But we used to use people as a proxy for productivity and outcomes. It was like, think about the people who were the most important people in a company. It's because they had the most headcount, right? And who are the most important clients. Like we still look at people and go, oh, they're enterprise. That means they have like more than 5,000 headcount. Oh, the ones below 5,000 are going to be, less important or whatever. And maybe it's because also of their spend, but we really looked at people as a proxy for productivity or for outcomes. And that equation is breaking. I mean, it started to break already prior to AI, but the thing that accelerates that is now all of a sudden, novices have a huge uplift in productivity. And so that yields, questions about like, so do you compensate them the same? Do you give them, 15% because that's how much more productive they are? What about the person who trained the model? Basically you have all these people who are at the beginning having an extra day of the week, but at the end of the day, like if everybody in your company has half an hour extra, then that actually isn't that exciting, right? They'll go like take another coffee break, or maybe they'll be incremental more productive because, they used the script to edit their video instead of doing it themselves. But what I think we truly need to do is re-engineer organizations. And that is going to be really hard and messy and fascinating and exponential. And so I think that those are the questions about productivity and metrics, the much more challenging questions that get me excited. The thing about, okay, if you have an entry level person and the best thing to do with them is to give them a really hard job, but pair them with an excellent mentor. Are you going to compensate the mentor because they're not coding? They're actually, mentoring. How is that all going to work? So sorry,
I
I
think
threw your metrics thing out the window.
No, not at all. I think that's really interesting because it is like just changing how we even think about work and productivity. And it's just that evolution is happening right now in front of us. I think you touched on something that really is in everyone's like kind of top of mind as well. There's a lot of talk about reorganization, but what does that really mean? Does that actually just mean job displacements? Does it mean cuts? Because you did say, we've seen smaller teams basically achieve the same results. So how do we actually adjust that when we still have the same amount of talent available to work and wanting to work, right? Are we going to see organizations all trim? Are we going to see people being relocated to different departments to kind of, optimize their capabilities and time in a different way? Like, how are you kind of seeing that trend in the next 5 to 10 years?
I was thinking about it because maybe 10, 15 years ago, I remember talking to Richard Waters, who's the tech correspondent. He's the West Coast editor now at the FT. And we were talking about the sort of disintermediation or disruption of media. And I said, what is it going to look like in 10 years? And he said, the same, just much leaner. And I was thinking about that because I then went to go see the FT's privately held company owned by Nikkei, but they have about the same amount of people, maybe even more. So it's interesting because we think that that's going to happen. And that is the bias. And of course, there is restructuring and has always been. But will AI transform that in a sort of doomsday scenario? Don't think it will. And I want to be really honest about that and not boosterish and say, only only the people who refuse to learn it will be displaced or something like that, which is sort of like, it's on you. But I hope that the people in a small company, it's easy, right? We just change the way we work. And in a startup, everybody does whatever is needed to a certain extent. You just pick the people that can do the work. But really, back to this assessment around AI, like that's fabulous to have a benchmark, to start to upskill people, to start to go into the conversation, which we've been having before AI, which is that skills are replacing this idea of the job because things are changing so quickly that to expect to do the same thing for 5 or 10 years, let alone 30, is really just not going to happen in the same way that it might have when I started out.
Yeah, I think you touched on a word which is kind of being used to describe the sentiment right now, which is like the doomism, the tech doomism kind of mentality. There's a lot of people who are really worried about job displacement being one, obviously, and then there's also other social concerns. I guess as you've studied the adoption of technology for years or even decades now at this point, you've always been studying the frontier technology and the adoption within society and the workforce. How do you think the adoption of AI has been different from other technology?
Well, obviously, it's been really fast and it's followed the sort of consumer tech adoption curves, like the social media. It's been compared to a lot of those. And it did start out that way, but leapt to enterprise so quickly in a way that, social media continues to try to, but doesn't really, in my opinion, add value for or really it's still not what they rely on. Whereas I think that OpenAI and Anthropic and a lot of enterprise software companies are like, okay, yeah, we're going full scale. This is about work AI. This is not about, making a cool headshot of you looking like a rhinoceros or whatever. So I think that is the change. And then going to China in 1999, that's when I went there and did the first foreign internet conference, sorry, in Beijing. Like people were still going to internet cafes for like bad dial up to get the internet. And then they quickly leapfrogged with mobile. But AI seems like it went global more quickly. So when generative AI first kind of came on the scene and got very popular, Indonesia. I did something in Dubai, I think, and I was sort of looking to see, okay, what's the international aspect of it? And UAE, Indonesia, some of these countries were going just as fast as the US, if not faster. And so it was really interesting to see how quickly that changed. And I'm not sure, I also feel like there is some geopolitical aspect to it. There's a lot of talk about data sovereignty. It's like this isn't our first rodeo. So some people are kind of a little bit more cautious as well about what the secondary and tertiary implications will be of us going full scale.
Yeah, like the thing you mentioned is like the barrier to actually adopt just became a lot lower. Like the infrastructure itself that's required. I'm not talking about actually building the LLMs, but like the adoption side of things is just a lot lower, and it's easier for even developing nations and economies to actually, completely embed the new technology into their economy and their society, right? So that's really interesting. I think let's take a step back. Tell me, what do you think makes someone an AI enabler or adopter, and what makes someone, I guess, the AI doomer or AI reluctant? Just like we meet
Wow.
someone right now, this is a bit more like a philosophical, I guess. What do you think makes someone? Is it just like simply by saying, "Oh, I tried it. I tried the app. I don't like it. I'm not going to use it." Or do you think, there's certain mentalities or mindsets people have?
That's a good question. And since I work with people on change, actually, my first job out of business school was as a change management person in consulting. And I think that if you can paint a picture that's vivid, that people can see themselves in, that can be really compelling. And that is why I'm a futurist. I mean, I didn't start out doing that. And I see it as a layer on top of a career that spans, being in startups and being a venture capitalist for a while, and then going into corporate and doing restructuring and turnaround and digital transformation and then bringing on new companies and corporate development. So all of it's change. Every single part of that is change. And the people who embrace that oftentimes, or maybe the people who didn't embrace it, were easier to spot, where they just couldn't see what the benefit would be, often to them. Like they couldn't see their role in that future scenario. And so that's one of the things I think that is so important to me about being able to paint those pictures, being able to, bring people together to help them paint that picture and help leaders paint it for their team and have that be inclusive, not just the leaders, but, the best possible futures for the most possible people.
Actually, when I met you, you were still running your own business and working mostly with the C-suites and board members, right? Running these like high level executive workshops.
Hmm.
So I do want to ask you, during your time when you're working with these senior executives, are there a lot of people saying, well, new tech and AI is for young folks? Like, or do you actually think, people are quite open minded from top down level to really, integrate AI and technology into the organizations, and the reluctance or the pushback maybe is coming from bottom up a bit more? I think there's a lot of discussion around this. Some people are saying, oh, people don't want to upskill. It's too, in Chinese, 麻烦, right? It's too much work. It's a
Yeah.
hassle.
Home
Then
math
others
fun.
saying, yeah. And then in other scenarios, people are saying, oh, it's actually, the top level is not having that strategic view. Did you kind of see that conflict, I guess? Or you think people are actually quite open minded these days?
No, I don't think people are necessarily open minded, but I think that the people that I attract are open minded. So, in a way, like, I'm a futurist, and for a long time I did not say that word, but I use the tools of strategic foresight, which are old. They've been around since the military invented them in World War II, and I would use those. But, over time, I think I'm always pushing the edge of what's possible. And that is it's A, what interests me. It's now what I'm known for. And so people aren't going to come to me and say, tell me what's possible. Oh, but I don't want to do it for myself. Like you kind of have to be bought in. And I don't see that. I mean, I have worked with board members who go, oh, we're not a technology company. We sell cars. And I kind of go, have you been to Shenzhen? Like they're just a bunch of computers on wheels, and they don't even have to have a steering wheel because eventually they'll all be driverless. So to a certain extent, I have met people like that. And I also realize that, just because I think that it's coming doesn't mean that everybody's ready. And one of the big things I think that's important that I focus on is how to get people there. And so many of the CEOs that I have worked with do have a vision and they are excited and they want to figure out how it is that they can bring all their people along, because that's still the hardest part of this. That is still the barrier right now to AI, unlocking AI value. It's the barrier to adoption. I think it's one of the most important things. And it's not young, it's not old, it's not top, it's not bottom, it's just people.
Yeah, it's the mentality shift. And like you said, also you attract the energy you kind of put out there as well, right? So, okay, so let's switch gears. I want to talk about work and education. Both of us are mothers. Your children's slightly older.
Mhm.
We were talking about this once, casually between the two of us, just like how do we prepare for the future generation? How do we prepare the future generation for the workforce, right? And I think this is top of mind for a lot of people as well. Many are saying maybe traditional even education is irrelevant. I don't know, like vocationally, upskilling is obviously a lot easier now to gain information online. So when you're looking at this, what are some trends for future hiring, upskilling? You kind of touch on it. It's about
Mhm.
being able to learn how to utilize AI. But what does it actually mean for maybe the future of talent? How do we actually stay up to date in a very practical way? Instead of just saying, AI is important, how do we actually adopt it in our learning?
So there's an interesting conversation I was having on LinkedIn about basically just in case learning and just in time learning. And there is a real aspect of applied learning that I think is important for AI, but also which AI kind of feeds into. And that is what I'm excited about, because there is a lot of, maybe we should learn AI skills, which I think everybody should. And there are a lot of other skills that we need to learn, like futures thinking, I think is really helpful. And it's been shown by academics and research papers that openness and a sense of autonomy over one's future actually lead to better outcomes. And those aren't AI skills, they're kind of more of the soft skills. Critical thinking is another one. And I've had people in various finance roles say, we've hired these new people and we feel like they're using AI so much, they're losing their critical thinking. We want to have the investors of the future. How do we make sure that those people have the kind of experience at work in their early days that will create the leaders that we want of this company in 15 years? So there are a lot of conversations about that. And you're right. Recently, some of the conversations I've had have been, it's about people. So there's the matching people or embedding the learning into the work you need to do. So the classic applied learning. And then there's connecting you with other people. So the one that I mentioned is this idea, and I wish I could remember how had done it or said it, but it was this idea that instead of just having people do all the rote kind of stuff that I did when I was first learning under the tutelage of Dr. Kissinger, it was work, right? It was like paying your dues and that kind of thing. And that's the early career stuff that in a lot of white collar jobs is just being obliterated. And that's the conversation about the broken pipeline, et cetera. But if you can take those people and instead of just giving them the bad jobs that AI can do already, give them really hard jobs that they can basically not do, and then let them use AI to the best of their abilities to see how far they can get. And then have them review that with a mentor who can really listen to them and say, well, maybe your thinking was off here, or, it was right here. And here's how you could get to that 100%. That will accelerate people in the early days of their career in a way that could transform your company if you can retain them. That I think is really exciting.
Yeah, I think when we were at that same event, we were talking about how when I started off as a junior journalist, a reporter, my career, like so much of the grunt work is really just writing up breaking news or the news of the day. And it's really, really boring, but it does train you to think about like what is the important information you want to relay. Can you write quickly?
Hmm.
Can you write succinctly, right? And right now, obviously, you could use any kind of chatbot and do that much better, faster than a human. So people are
Yeah.
worried that's going to replace, junior staff. And then on the other hand, like with like finance people I can build models quicker. You can build DCF in a couple minutes. You don't need them plugging in numbers one by one. They can just scrape the annual reports really quickly.
Yeah.
It does kind of serve an unfortunate the reality, which is what you said, is like we're seeing I guess the guinea pigs, unfortunately, the juniors right now, the fresh grads right now,
Hmm.
so heavily reliant on these tools. And there's a gap between what they are doing now and what mentors are able to offer, and kind of switch the whole relationship between mentor and mentee right now. Right. So I think I totally agree with you. If, someone can guide you a little bit and help you like build a thinking framework, or the realistic end goal of what we're trying to train them up to do, that would be really helpful. It reminded me of this really funny use case. Sorry, I'm going on a rant, but I heard about this story where this teacher is really, really open minded to adopting AI in the classroom. And it was so
Hmm.
smart and genius. What he did was he knew all the kids, I think they were high school kids, were going to use AI to help write their essays. So he gave them like an essay topic, say, go write this story back home. Everyone came back with a somewhat polished, piece, right? And then in class, he actually said, now argue against this. So then it actually forces them to think, right? To think through what they wrote about. So it's not just like, oh, you wrote a well polished article without, or like essay without any grammatical errors. It's like, think through what you actually wrote and then like counter it, right? That really forces you to think, right? Like exactly to your point. Anyway, I think this is a really interesting topic, and I'm constantly thinking about how this might affect my children in the future and how we can teach them to still have that kind of critical thinking ability. I think, okay, I want to wrap up, soon, given the time, but I want to kind of hear from you a more personal observation perspective. You spent half of your career in the US. You've spent time in New York with the DC crew, with
Yeah.
that kind of environment. You've spent some time, you said, in mainland and Hong Kong. China. You spent some time in mainland China and Hong Kong as well. How do you see the two international like big business hubs right now? Like I guess especially comparing New York and Hong Kong, treat new technology differently? And is integration of new technology into the workplace at a relatively similar pace and culture acceptance? Or do you kind of see that there's like a bit of a culture gap or difference as well in terms of that?
Well, I think that when I was in Hong Kong, there was a lot of talk about how people in China were techno optimists and people in the US were techno doomerists, or whatever the vocabulary was. I don't think that that's true. That's not been my impression. I think that your initial comment about how consumerization of AI has just gone crazy in China, like mirroring WeChat and the super apps and, all the things that you can do on your phone. My impression is that it's a very phone focused culture. And that makes sense. Like back to the 90s, when penetration was low and infrastructure wasn't great, that was the big change, as mobile became so far ahead in Asia than it ever was in the US. And I still see that that's something, everything has to be mobile in some way. Whereas in the US, it's a little bit less like that. I find people have much more experience with ambient technology here. Everybody that I see seems to have like Alexa in their home, and they're always talking. There's a lot of voice activation because, I mean, there is in China as well, but usually through the phone. But like people are, speaking to their cars, and they're speaking to their kitchen appliances and that kind of thing. That's been my experience. And really, Grace, it's only been a few weeks. So really, what do I know? But even in the enterprise space, like there is a lot of conversations about how can we adopt this? How do we adopt it at speed? And I wouldn't call it doom and gloom at all. I think it's much more like, how can we unlock this potential? It's going slower than some people hope. And, and it's going to change the world
Yeah,
in
I
both
think
places, in both
Yeah, yeah, that's
places,
really interesting.
but
An interesting
slightly different.
observation. Like where you said, like in China, it's more in your face. It's like on your phone. Everything is accessed through mobile. So it feels like you're actually using technology constantly versus in the West, like it's more ambient. Like you're actually all plugged in anyway, but maybe it's just not through your mobile. It's through all these other hardwares and, like ways of accessing technology. Okay, so I think the last question is something I have to ask everyone. What is something that you hold an unconventional view of, or you think there's a misconception of?
I do think that there is a sort of era in work where people will not be a part of large organizations and will flow to work and things will be quite frictionless. There was this brief moment where there was decentralized autonomous organizations during the metaverse and sort of Web3 craze. And I thought that that was going to be the way that we formed to create value and then, and then went away. And so that has not come to pass. But I do think that, in some respects, and I went and joined a giant 30,000 person organization. So maybe I'm wrong. But I do think that there is this opportunity for people to come together to create value and then, break apart. And that whole idea of work that may be tokenized, that there are communities that, form and then reform around projects is something that not that many people in large companies believe is possible. So who knows? We might yet have something like that. And the other thing I think is that everybody should do some kind of future thinking. So prior to this role was speaking to some large universities to develop curriculum for young people around the idea of future thinking, which I think should be, as popular as design thinking.
Yeah, I know. I actually noticed that you've done speeches at HUST, which is a leading STEM university out here in Asia, and then you've done a lot of TED Talks as well as like master classes on the futurist thinking mentalities. If anyone's interested, go check that out on YouTube. Thank you so much, Diana. Any other parting wisdom for us, or I know it's quite late for you already in New York.
Yeah, no, I think that people should just play. Like you only have one life and AI is going to come. And then after that, quantum's going to accelerate all of it. But at the end of the day, it's sort of new tech, same humans. So I think that if we can keep that, it's a grounding mentality that allows us to play as opposed to always be fearful of what's next.
Thank you so much. It was lovely speaking to you.
Lovely to see you.
If you enjoyed this conversation and found it insightful, please follow and subscribe to Differentiate Understanding on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Grace Shao, and I'd be so grateful if you shared an episode with a friend. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.